The name itself echoes through history like a guttural cough. Caligula. For nearly 2 millennia, it has been synonymous with madness, tyranny, and an almost inconceivable depravity. But what does that truly mean? What visions does it conjure beyond the sanitized bullet points of a textbook? The conventional accounts, often for the sake of brevity or decency, gloss over the raw, visceral truth of his reign. They tell you he was cruel, that he was insane, that he was eventually murdered, but they rarely immerse you in the chilling reality of what it felt like to live under such a man, to witness his grotesque transformations, to breathe the same air as a self-proclaimed god who saw human suffering as his greatest entertainment. We are not here to merely recite facts. We are here to peel back the layers of polite history, to descend into the psychological abyss of Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, better known as Caligula. We will explore the dramatic, often nauseating details of his rule, the moments of profound crisis, the psychological intensity, and the lesser-known facts that truly define his terrifying legacy. Prepare yourself, for the story of Caligula's madness was far more depraved than you can possibly imagine. To understand the monster, we must first glimpse the boy, the prince who captivated an empire. Born in 12 AD, Gaius was the cherished son of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, two of the most popular and respected figures in Rome. Germanicus, a brilliant general and beloved nephew of Emperor Tiberius, was a living legend, revered by his legions and the Roman populace alike. His campaigns in Germania had cemented his heroic status, and his personal integrity was unimpeachable. Agrippina, the granddaughter of Emperor Augustus, was equally admired for her strength, dignity, and fertility. It was during these campaigns that Gaius earned his enduring nickname. As a toddler, he would accompany his father to military camps, dressed in a miniature legionary uniform, complete with tiny caligae, the hobnailed military boots. The soldiers, charmed by this miniature mascot, affectionately called him Caligula, or Little Boots. This image of a beloved child, surrounded by adoring legionaries, embodying the hopes of Rome, stands in stark, almost unbearable contrast to the figure he would become. This innocent moniker, meant to signify affection, would later become a chilling pseudonym for tyranny. But this idyllic childhood was shattered by a cascade of tragedies. In 19 AD, Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances in Antioch, widely believed to have been poisoned on the orders of a paranoid Tiberius. The empire mourned. Agrippina, devastated and defiant, returned to Rome carrying her husband's ashes, a figure of profound sorrow and silent accusation. This was the first seismic crack in young Caligula's world. The sudden, inexplicable loss of his heroic father, replaced by a pervasive sense of betrayal and unseen enemies. The years that followed plunged Caligula into a viper's nest. His mother, Agrippina, and his elder brothers, Nero and Drusus Caesar, became targets of Tiberius's growing paranoia, fueled by his ruthless Praetorian prefect, Sejanus. One by one, Caligula watched as his family was systematically destroyed. His brothers were starved to death or driven to suicide in exile. His mother was imprisoned and eventually died in exile, possibly by starvation or suicide. Imagine the psychological toll on a young boy, witnessing the public humiliation, imprisonment, and slow, agonizing deaths of almost everyone he loved at the hands of the very man who ruled the empire. By his mid-teens, Caligula was the sole surviving son of Germanicus. He was summoned to Tiberius's villa on the island of Capri, a place that had become the emperor's self-imposed exile, and for many, a gilded cage of surveillance and debauchery. Here, the aged Tiberius, now a reclusive and deeply suspicious ruler, subjected Caligula to constant scrutiny, testing his reactions, probing his loyalties. Suetonius, our primary biographer, describes this period as Caligula's school of dissimulation. He learned to hide his true feelings, to feign humility and obedience, to smile when his heart recoiled. He became a master of masks, a skill essential for survival in Tiberius's court, but one that would later serve a far darker purpose. He learned that outward compliance was the price of survival, and that the true power lay in the unseen, the unspoken, and the utterly unpredictable. He lived in the shadow of imperial power, absorbing its terrifying lessons. When Tiberius died in 37 AD, the news was greeted with universal jubilation. Caligula, the last surviving son of the beloved Germanicus, was hailed as a savior, a beacon of hope after years of Tiberius's oppressive rule. The populace poured onto the streets, offering sacrifices and cheering his name. He was young, charismatic, and seemed to embody all the virtues of his heroic father. He promised generosity, justice, and a return to the open, dignified rule of Augustus. He began by pardoning those accused under Tiberius, staging magnificent games, and delivering on his promises of public goodwill. For a few glorious months, Caligula was indeed Rome's darling. The trauma of his youth seemed to have been overcome, replaced by the promise of a golden age. Then, the whispers began. In the autumn of 37 AD, Caligula fell gravely ill. The exact nature of his illness remains a subject of historical debate. Some suggest it was a severe fever, others an epileptic fit, or even a form of encephalitis. Whatever its cause, it was profoundly debilitating, and for a time, Rome feared for his life. Sacrifices were offered across the empire, and loyal subjects vowed to die if the gods would spare their beloved emperor. Miraculously, Caligula recovered. But the man who emerged from that sickbed was not the same man who had entered it. The transformation was chillingly swift and absolute. The genial prince vanished, replaced by a figure consumed by paranoia, megalomania, and a perverse cruelty that would shock even a hardened Roman society. It was as if the illness had scoured away his humanity, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve of unbound power and malice. Was it brain damage? A neurological condition exacerbated by stress, or simply the unraveling of a mind that had spent years in a school of dissimulation, finally unburdening itself of all pretense once absolute power was attained? Historians grapple with these questions, but the consequences were undeniable. The initial signs of his descent were subtle but terrifying. Those who had vowed to die for him were now forced to commit suicide. His former allies and advisors found themselves summarily executed. Tiberius Gemellus, his young cousin and co-heir designated by Tiberius, was among the first victims. Caligula had sworn an oath to Tiberius to protect Gemellus, but such vows meant nothing to the new emperor. Gemellus was compelled to take his own life, his existence a mere inconvenience to Caligula's absolute claim to power. The pattern was set. Loyalty was demanded but never reciprocated, and perceived threats were swiftly, ruthlessly eliminated. The climate of fear that gripped Rome was palpable. No one was safe, especially those close to him. Senators, once the pillars of the Republic, found themselves reduced to cowering sycophants. Caligula reveled in their terror, deliberately cultivating an atmosphere of unpredictable, arbitrary cruelty. He would invite senators to lavish dinners, then suddenly burst into maniacal laughter, explaining, "Just imagine, with one nod, I could have all of you killed." The chilling humor of it was designed to strip them of dignity and hope. He often held a gladiatorial sword in his hand, casually sharpening it while discussing state affairs, his eyes glinting with amusement as his terrified audience squirmed. His executions were not merely acts of political necessity, they were sadistic performances. He delighted in prolonging the agony of his victims, ordering them to be tortured before being killed, or even after. "Strike him so that he can feel he is dying," was one of his infamous commands. He confiscated the property of the condemned, swelling his coffers and further impoverishing the elite. Families were not spared. The parents of his victims were sometimes forced to witness the executions, and then attend celebratory banquets afterward, feigning joy or facing the same fate. The very fabric of Roman society, built on custom, law, and a semblance of senatorial dignity, began to fray under this sustained psychological assault. Caligula's depravity knew no bounds, extending into every facet of his life, especially his sexual conduct. While imperial incest was not unknown in Rome, Caligula's relationships with his three sisters Agrippina the Younger, Julia Livilla, and particularly Drusilla were scandalously public and profoundly disturbing. Drusilla, his favorite, was elevated to almost divine status, treated as his wife and consort, and even designated as the official wife of the emperor. Their affair was open, flagrant, and a source of both outrage and fear among the Roman elite. Suetonius records that he would often parade her in front of his dinner guests, kissing her in full view, and that he engaged in sexual relations with all three of his sisters. When Drusilla died in 38 AD, Caligula plunged into an elaborate, theatrical mourning. He declared her a goddess, Diva Drusilla, and ordered public mourning ceremonies that were so strict anyone caught smiling or engaging in frivolous activity was subject to severe punishment. He constructed temples and established a cult for her, further blurring the lines between human and divine, and cementing his own twisted connection to the gods. But this grief, real or performative, did not temper his desires. He continued his sexual excesses, indulging in orgies, forcing aristocratic wives and daughters into prostitution, and publicly humiliating their husbands. Senators were made to witness their wives being taken by the emperor, a profound degradation designed to strip them of their honor and agency. He even opened a state-run brothel in his palace, staffed by the wives and daughters of Rome's most distinguished citizens, the proceeds of which ostensibly went to the imperial treasury. The very idea of it was a grotesque mockery of Roman virtue and dignity. His cruelty was not confined to individuals. It permeated public life and spectacle. The Roman arena, usually a place for entertainment and displays of martial prowess, became another stage for Caligula's sadism. He would order citizens to be thrown to wild beasts for minor offenses, or sometimes for no offense at all. He forced prisoners, and even respectable citizens, whom he had deliberately bankrupted, to fight as gladiators for his amusement. Imagine the stench of blood, sweat, and fear in the air, the guttural roar of the crowd, as men, not trained for combat, stumbled, fell, and met horrific ends for the emperor's pleasure. He once ordered a large section of the audience at a gladiatorial show to be seized and thrown to the beasts because they had not shown enough enthusiasm for a particular fight. This was not justice. It was caprice, and it was terrifying. Caligula's financial policies were as ruinous as his personal conduct was depraved. His predecessor, Tiberius, had been notoriously parsimonious, leaving a vast treasury. Caligula squandered it in a few short years on colossal, absurd projects and lavish games. He commissioned the construction of an elaborate floating bridge, nearly 3 miles long, across the Bay of Baiae, simply to disprove a prophecy that he was as likely to become emperor as to ride a horse across the bay. He rode his horse Incitatus across it, dressed in a golden cloak, followed by his retinue, a magnificent and utterly wasteful display of power. He financed these follies by imposing new draconian taxes, confiscating inheritances, and fabricating charges against wealthy citizens to seize their assets. He even established a fish pond, where he would chain his victims to stakes and have them slowly eaten by eels, deriving immense pleasure from their prolonged agony. This was not just punishment. It was a macabre spectacle of death, designed to terrorize and to showcase his absolute power over life and limb. Perhaps the most astonishing manifestation of Caligula's megalomania was his insistence on being worshipped as a living god. He demanded that temples be built to him, that sacrifices be offered in his name, and that senators and high officials prostrate themselves before him. He would dress in various divine guises, as Jupiter, as Hercules, as Apollo, or even as Venus, the goddess of love, donning their attributes and demanding adoration. He would hold conversations with the statue of Jupiter in the Capitol, sometimes whispering secrets, sometimes shouting angrily as if in a divine argument. He even declared himself to be the god of the sea, Neptune, and built a massive floating palace on Lake Nemi, adorned with precious stones and equipped with elaborate banqueting halls and baths. He would then summon senators to the lake, forcing them to participate in grotesque ceremonies and orgies on board, a deliberate humiliation designed to break their spirit and assert his divine authority. His contempt for the Roman elite reached its nadir with his infamous treatment of his horse, Incitatus. This magnificent animal was given a marble stable, an ivory manger, purple blankets, and a jeweled bridle. Caligula would invite Incitatus to dinner, where the horse would sit at a special table, eating gilded oats and drinking wine from golden gobble. He even planned to appoint Incitatus as a consul, the highest elected office in Rome, a position of immense dignity and power. This was not merely the eccentricity of a madman. It was a deliberate, calculated insult to the Roman Senate, a scathing mockery of their authority and their sacred institutions. If a horse could be a consul, what did that say about the men who held the office? It was a stark demonstration of his absolute power and his profound disdain for human intellect and tradition. Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher and ambassador, provided one of the most vivid and unsettling first-hand accounts of Caligula's depravity. In 40 AD, Philo led a Jewish delegation to Rome, seeking to dissuade Caligula from placing a colossal statue of himself in the Temple of Jerusalem, an act that would have been an unimaginable sacrilege and an open declaration of war on Jewish religious freedom. Philo describes being dragged through Caligula's sprawling imperial gardens, forced to follow the emperor from room to room, while Caligula gave absurd instructions to his architects and gardeners, completely ignoring the urgent pleas of the embassy. Caligula would suddenly stop, demand to know who these men were, listen to their entreaties with a twisted smile, then dismiss them with a cruel joke or a non-committal gesture, before darting off to another part of the palace. The sheer capriciousness, the utter lack of empathy, and the terrifying power to toy with the fate of an entire people, captured in Philo's account, paints a portrait of a man utterly detached from reality. His mind a labyrinth of self-aggrandizement and perverse humor. Even Caligula's military ambitions devolved into farce and humiliation. He led legions on a supposed campaign against the Germanic tribes in 39 AD. The most famous anecdote from this expedition, recounted by Suetonius, describes Caligula ordering his troops to line up on the shores of the English Channel and collect seashells. He then declared these seashells the spoils of the ocean and demanded a magnificent triumph for his victory over the sea. This was not a military exercise. It was a grotesque charade designed to inflate his ego and mock the very concept of military honor. He then planned an invasion of Britain, but the campaign was aborted almost before it began, likely due to a combination of his own indecisiveness, poor planning, and a genuine threat of mutiny among his disaffected legions. Despite the failure, he still insisted on a grand triumph in Rome, fabricating a parade of German captives and constructing a monumental lighthouse that served no real purpose. The cumulative effect of Caligula's reign was one of pervasive dread. The imperial court was a cesspool of sycophancy, paranoia, and casual cruelty. Senators, once proud and influential, were forced to crawl on their knees, to praise his every absurdity, to feign delight at his darkest whims. Their lives, their families, their fortunes, all hung by the thinnest thread, subject to the whim of a man who equated power with the ability to inflict suffering. The public, initially adoring, became terrified, their initial enthusiasm replaced by a grim resignation. The once beloved little boots had become the embodiment of a living nightmare. The psychological toll on Caligula himself, whatever its origin, was immense. His paranoia deepened with each passing day. He trusted no one, seeing conspiracy in every shadow, betrayal in every whisper. He reportedly slept little, plagued by nightmares, or spent his nights pacing the palace corridors, conversing with Jupiter. His mind, once sharp, seemed to fray like old rope, his actions becoming increasingly erratic, his pronouncements more bizarre. He suffered from insomnia, which may have been a symptom of his underlying physical or mental condition, or a consequence of the crushing weight of his unchecked power and the self-inflicted isolation it brought. His skin developed a chronic itch, causing him to scratch himself raw, and he sometimes suffered from convulsions. The physical decay seemed to mirror the psychological unraveling, a terrifying confluence of body and mind, succumbing to the pressures of an existence devoid of restraint. The seeds of conspiracy were sown in the fertile ground of fear and desperation. By 41 AD, the Roman elite, the Praetorian Guard, and even members of his own household could endure no more. The chief conspirators included Cassius Chaerea, a tribune of the Praetorian Guard, who had been repeatedly mocked and humiliated by Caligula for his effeminate voice; Cornelius Sabinus, another tribune, who also felt insulted; and various senators, exhausted by the emperor's reign of terror. They met in secret, their fear of discovery outweighed only by their dread of Caligula's continued rule. They knew that failure meant not just death, but an agonizing, protracted, and humiliating death. The stakes could not have been higher. The opportunity arose during the Palatine Games, an annual series of athletic and theatrical performances held in the imperial palace. On the 24th of January, 41 AD, Caligula attended the games, lingering to watch a performance by young Greek dancers. As he prepared to leave, making his way through a narrow, secluded passage beneath the palace known as the Cryptoporticus, the conspirators struck. What followed was a brutal, chaotic, and frenzied assassination, a desperate act by men pushed to their absolute limits. As Caligula entered the passage, Cassius Chaerea approached him, ostensibly to ask for the day's watchword. Caligula, with his usual contempt, responded with an obscene or demeaning phrase. This was the signal. Chaerea drew his sword and plunged it into Caligula's neck, reportedly shouting, "Take this," or "Remember the old man," a reference to Chaerea's age, for which Caligula had often ridiculed him. The initial blow was not immediately fatal. Caligula, a strong man, cried out, attempting to flee or defend himself, but the narrow passage offered no escape. Other conspirators, including Sabinus and a flurry of Praetorian guardsmen, swarmed him. They hacked at him with their swords, a wild, desperate barrage of blows born of years of suppressed terror and rage. Suetonius reports that Caligula was struck by 44 wounds, a testament to the ferocity and number of his attackers, each blow a desperate attempt to ensure he was truly dead, to express years of pent-up hatred. His body slumped to the ground, bleeding profusely, his life draining away in the dimly lit passage. The assassination plunged the palace into immediate pandemonium. Caligula's German bodyguards, intensely loyal and formidable warriors, burst onto the scene. They were enraged, cutting down anyone they encountered, mistakenly killing senators and innocent bystanders in their fury. The cries of panic, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying filled the palace. Caligula's wife, Caesonia, and their infant daughter, Julia Drusilla, were also brutally murdered shortly after, their brains reportedly dashed against a wall by the conspirators, ensuring no heir would remain to avenge him. The horror of his reign was now matched by the horror of his demise, a gruesome finale to a life steeped in depravity. In the immediate aftermath, there was a brief moment of profound uncertainty. The Senate debated restoring the Republic, a fleeting dream quickly extinguished by the Praetorian Guard. The Guard, having participated in the assassination, had no interest in losing their power and influence. Instead, they quickly found Claudius, Caligula's timid and scholarly uncle, hiding behind a curtain in the palace, terrified for his life. They hailed him emperor, and Rome, exhausted by civil strife, accepted. The nightmare was over, but the scars remained. So, what do we make of Caligula's madness? Was it clinical insanity, a diagnosable condition, or simply the ultimate corruption of absolute power? Historians and medical professionals have speculated for centuries. Theories abound. Asterisk. Epilepsy. Asterisk. Asterisk. Ancient sources mention Caligula suffering from seizures which could have led to personality changes and erratic behavior. Asterisk. Hyperthyroidism. Asterisk. Asterisk. The symptoms of Graves' disease, irritability, anxiety, rapid mood swings, bulging eyes, align with some of Caligula's described behaviors. Asterisk. Encephalitis. Asterisk. Asterisk. An inflammation of the brain, possibly from a viral infection, could have caused significant neurological and behavioral changes, especially if his 37 AD illness was encephalitis. Asterisk. Lead poisoning. Asterisk. Asterisk. Common in Roman society due to lead pipes. ND cooking vessels. Chronic lead exposure can cause mental deterioration, irritability, and violent outbursts. Asterisk. Brain tumor. Asterisk. Asterisk. A tumor, particularly in the frontal lobe, could explain the radical shifts in personality, judgment, and impulse control. Asterisk. Inherited mental illness. Asterisk. Asterisk. The Julio-Claudian dynasty had a history of eccentric and unstable personalities, leading some to suggest a genetic predisposition. Asterisk. Psychopathy. Narcissistic personality disorder. Asterisk. Asterisk. His complete lack of empathy, grandiosity, manipulative behavior, and delight in others' suffering align strongly with modern definitions of these disorders. However, a definitive diagnosis is impossible across 2 millennia. What is clearer is that the madness of Caligula was, at the very least, a profound unraveling of a personality under the unbearable weight of unchecked absolute power. The traumatic childhood, the school of dissimulation under Tiberius, the initial illness, all these factors likely contributed to a pre-existing fragility or a predisposition to extreme behavior. When coupled with the supreme, unchallenged authority of the Roman emperor, where every whim was law and every desire could be instantly gratified, the result was catastrophic. Caligula's story is a chilling testament not just to the fragility of the human mind, but to the corrosive nature of power itself. He systematically dismantled social norms, legal traditions, and the very concept of human dignity, all to satiate his own perverse desires and to demonstrate his omnipotence. He showed Rome, and indeed history, that a man with unlimited power, unbound by law, morality, or even sanity, could transform an empire into his personal torture chamber. He became a living embodiment of the axiom: power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. His legacy was one of profound warning. Later emperors, even those as cruel as Nero, never quite plumbed the depths of arbitrary public sadism that Caligula reveled in. He set a terrifying precedent for what an emperor could do if completely unmoored from responsibility. His assassination, violent and desperate as it was, served as a stark reminder that even divine emperors could be struck down, that there's a limit to how much depravity humanity will endure. Caligula's brief, horrifying reign stands as one of history's most vivid and unsettling cautionary tales. It forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature, to acknowledge the fragility of civilization when confronted with unchecked power, and to remember that the true horror of the past often lies not in abstract events, but in the raw, visceral experiences of those who lived through them. The little boots who charmed an army became a monster who terrorized an empire. His story, a chilling reminder that even the most beloved figures can descend into a depravity more profound and more terrifying than we can possibly imagine.